All right. People were linking the hell out of this video to me the other day. The Breaking Points January 6th video featuring everyone's favorite Republican, Glenn Greenwald. Let's go. The last video that we saw from Breaking Points was agonizingly stupid. They basically took a tweet thread and used it to presuppose that a Nazi march in Washington was some kind of Fed op with demonstrably, provably false information. And then we looked over the YouTube comments and people were soy-facing and praising them for their real journalism as they read tweets and, you know, say things that are incorrect. So now we have Glenn Greenwald, another person who's very fond of Twitter and being incorrect. Let's go. How the deep state has weaponized Jan 6. Let's go! I love that. Very left-leaning title.
Joining us now, we have Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, the one and only Glenn Greenwald. Of course, you guys know he's on Substack as well as...
All right, hold on, wait. This is Krystal's exposed skin and not an additional slab of flesh sort of draped on top of her shoulder, right?
As Rumble and a bunch of other platforms. Where do you mostly want people to follow you at this point, Glenn?
Yeah, the writing is on Substack.
With the lighting, it's hard to tell if I'm looking at a collarbone shadow here. Is it just a big band-aid? Honest to God, I think the shading here is a bit bad, like the lighting, but I respect the style. I don't care. Do wacky fashion. I don't care.
I do video reports on Rumble, and then there's a new podcast app called Callin, which a bunch of people like Brianna Joy Gray and Matt Taibbi and many others are using. So any of those platforms will do. And also, of course, my frequent appearances here on Breaking Point. Most importantly.
Okay, a quick follow-up question. Is Glenn Greenwald currently being life drained by a lich? Is he in Siberia? Yeah, is he speaking from the astral plane? Why is he gray? What is happening?
Yeah, you do the Rumble like video segments.
Yeah, I love those.
Are really good. I know you put a lot of time and effort into those, and that's not, you know, I guess I maybe have added respect.
Oh, he's in the gray zone.
To what we do. So
you're right.
Like personally, like, oh, he's doing a good job at that thing. Anyway,
Thank you.
Wanted to bring you on to focus in particular on the dangers of how 1/6 has been weaponized to further the interests of the security state. Because in a lot of ways, I mean, 1/6 was like a dramatic failure in terms of being able to protect the Capitol and keep people down, keep the barricades up. So this massive failure for the security state that they then, as they always do, somehow turn around and use to make themselves only stronger. So was hoping you could...
Hold on. Is Breaking Points the channel that pretends to be centrist? Where is that old video edit of mine? My assessment of the Rising. Where was that where was that old video of mine? It's still true. Everything that I said back then is still true. Is this it? Hold on. Here we go. A gay pride flag for the LGBT month. And Krystal Ball will say, yeah, well, this is good, I guess, but we have to recognize that corporate hegemony is never going to sincerely, you know, promote the interests of gay people. This is just a virtue signaling attempt to get their attention. And Saagar will say,
you're completely right. This is just virtue signaling. Corporations have been brainwashed by post-Frankfurt neo-Marxist academics who are trying to disseminate an anti-white agenda by educating the wealthy and the children of the wealthy to hate white people in the pursuit of a wokeness cult.
And Krystal Ball will say, well, I don't know if I agree about that, but I do agree that corporations are bad. And Saagar will say,
yes, corporations are bad. You know who else believes that? Tucker Carlson. Let's go to a Tucker Carlson clip, folks.
Cue 2 minutes of Tucker Carlson in the middle of a segment about how black people aren't humans, talking about how corporations are bad because they support black people, but in like an insincere way. Then they cut back to Rising. Yeah, wow, you know, you gotta hand it to him when he says stuff that could be a right or left-leaning position. It's really kind of ambiguous, you know? And then Saagar will say,
yeah, I completely agree. I really do think the insincere attempts to appeal to the interests of BLM on the part of corporations really signals how corporations are furthering the downfall of Western civilization. Really, it is nearly impossible for conservatives to imagine themselves living in the glorious, culturally hegemonous America that they once lived in back 50, 60 years ago, as long as these corporations continue to shill for anti-white agendas.
And then Krystal Ball will say, well, I don't know if I agree about that, but at least we agree corporations are bad. And then the segment ends. That's it. Yeah, and things haven't changed. If anything, the dialectic has advanced, and it's gotten even more explicit with this. But yeah, that's pretty much...
lay on some of those implications.
Sure. So my reference point for the overall dynamic you're describing, in which some event takes place that produces a justifiable level of fear in the population, which is then seized upon by authorities and centers of power in order to exploit and augment that fear more and more as the days and months pass from that event in order to gain more power for themselves. Obviously, for me at least, is based in my experience doing reporting on and analysis of the First World.
One of the things that really bothers me is when so-called political experts simplify the incredibly complicated network of like differing material interests down to like the deep state or the security state. I really don't like that. What group are we talking about? Are we talking about the military-industrial complex? Are we talking about like the State Department? Are we talking about like you know, our foreign ally? Like what group? Because they all work together, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have the same interests. They want different things, you know. For example, the military-industrial complex, I don't really think they care whether like America wins or America is strong. I think they care whether or not they get their contracts, you know. If Lockheed Martin and Boeing you know, were still around after China annexed America, they would just keep doing their contracts for China. I don't. It's not like a nationalism thing. There are different interests here. I think the State Department is more interested in like American hegemony, like foreign corporations, and like the banking sector are probably just more interested in the flow of capital. Like there's so much, like there's so many complexities there, you know.
And terror, which was very similar. There was
hold on. You talk a big faith when it comes to it. You don't confront/attack them on their shows. Tim Pool and his podcast, Krystal and the Krystal Kyle and Friends. Yeah, that's because I'm appealing to different audiences. So what I never do is I never lie. If I'm on Tim Pool's show, my goal there isn't to talk to him the way that I would talk about Tim Pool over here, because if I did that, none of his audience would listen to me. Like at the end of the day, the outcome is what I care about. If I go over there and I'm just like, hey, everything you say is wrong. You lie in every single video. This is dumb as shit. Like it'll feel good for you guys, but it will never move over any of his fans, you know? Unfortunately, that's just how things like this work, you know? You always have to work within the limits of productive discourse, you know? And unfortunately for me, those limits are pretty severe because I am a fairly inflammatory person on my program, and it gets you guys used to that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean it's always the most productive attitude to take when you're actually speaking to that person or in the midst of their audiences. Like, think of Charlie Kirk, right? I hate Charlie Kirk, right? But the first time I talked to Kirk, I was laughing with him the whole time, and that did a lot more for me than getting mad at him ever would, you know?
A traumatic event, which is the 9/11 attack that killed 3,000 Americans on the same day. But there was never any mass casualty attack anywhere close to it up until this very moment, 20 years later. And yet so many of the quote unquote temporary measures adopted in its...
Wait, what? The only time we had a mass casualty event after 9/11 was the like 5 people who died at January 6th? Are we talking about COVID? COVID's a mass casualty event. January 6th wasn't a mass casualty. What?
Its name, such as the Patriot Act and a whole variety of other spying and detention powers.
Oh, he's talking about stuff that the State Department or like the deep state can use to legitimize like the extension of the security apparatus.
Remain not just embedded as though it happened a month ago rather than 20 years ago, but they've been expanded wildly beyond their original intent. And for years, that was the strategy, was to constantly remind people of how visceral those fears were, because fear is a very strong motivating factor for humans. Knowing that the more ethereal or abstract concerns on the other side of the ledger, the erosion of civil liberties, the invasion of privacy, the breakdown of due process, are much more abstract and distant concerns that are often no match for reminding people of 3,000 dead Americans buried under a huge pile of rubble. So that...
What he's saying right now is completely correct. How the security state, you know, the security agencies and the people who want to promote their interests will fearmonger in order to pass through. Like, anyone who remembers, like, the Patriot Act and what happened after 9/11 and the whole, like, Iraq war era of, like, paranoia and, like, terrorism paranoia, like, yeah, this is 100% true. The issue is that, as far as I know, nothing happened as a product of January 6th. No new laws have been passed. So what he's saying right now is valid as a concept, but it doesn't apply to 1/6 because I don't think anything has happened. Like, what laws have been passed? What extensions have been made?
That is very much the similar dynamic.
They increased the Capitol Police budget. Yeah, that's not an apparatus of like national security. That's literally just like, hey, we need more guys in this building. Yeah, that's not. That's not. Yeah, they do that anyway.
I think we see that with COVID, by the way, as well, where you talk about people dying in the hospital and nothing can compete with that in terms of the cost, whether it's children being out of school for 2 years and mental health crises from isolation and
Nearly
lockdown.
a million people
visceral.
dead.
The same is true here. Everybody saw the footage. Everybody agrees, who's decent, that those were horrible things to watch. We never want political violence in our politics. But the attempt to keep it in perspective has been almost impossible, given the concerted effort to exploit the emotions surrounding January 6th and to turn it into something that it never was, an attempted coup, an insurrection.
I see. He doesn't think that it's a coup or an insurrection. Like, they literally were going in there to try to depose the election to establish Trump. Like that's not arguable. That was their stated goal. That was the thing they were trying to do, you know. These hysterical leftists, the deep state is lying and telling you that time that a bunch of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building in order to change the results of a presidential election, we're doing a coup.
As though 1,000 Trump supporters got anywhere close to overthrowing the most militarized, armed, and powerful government in the history of mankind. And
those are non sequiturs. It can be an attempted coup, even if they didn't have enough people to actually do it. Also, you don't need 1,000 people to kill elected officials. You can actually do just one. 1,000 people is actually quite enough to kill all of the elected officials in the Capitol building, if that had been how far they'd gone. That's actually more than enough people. You know, you could do it with a few. 1,000's overkill, if anything. It was their intention that determined whether or not it was an attempted coup, and that was what they wanted to do.
Obviously, this week is an effort to rejuvenate that exploitation.
Well, that's what you always point to, Glenn, in terms of the actual record of this whenever it comes to the justice system. Lay that out for us. What, 1 year later, as we assess it, relative to the crackdown on people's lives and the actual militarization of Washington, D.C., the shutdown of the presidential inauguration, they turned our city into a legit green zone for months. 1 year later, what do we know about the prosecutions and the way that the government has responded to this in an official manner?
So what he's talking about was literally just them upping security in the Capitol after the Capitol was attacked. Like, that's not an extension of the security state. That's sensible city planning. You would do that with any government building that gets attacked. They did that with courthouses during BLM in Portland. Like, that's not... Putting up fences and having extra guards is not an extension of the deep state. That's just something that happens after buildings are attacked. It's just a normal thing that happens.
So I'll just use a different frame of reference just to set the groundwork for that, which is the Russiagate investigation. For years, we were told that there was rampant criminality on the part of the Trump campaign and then the Trump administration for having criminally conspired with the Kremlin. There was a lot of debate about whether that happened. They got a prosecutor, everyone.
And then it turned out to be true. They had numerous indictments and arrests, and members of the Trump administration did indeed collaborate with Russian politics. So yeah, whoa, thank you for setting it up. The question was whether or not Trump himself had engaged in criminal activity, which wasn't found to be the case. Probably because the members of his cabinet or of his administration thought he was too stupid to be worth bringing into the fold. You know, imagine you're like some corrupt government official next to Trump. Why would you ever tell Trump anything? Like, he's a moron and he'll brag about it on like camera. Why would you like...
Trusted Robert Mueller to lead an 18-month probe with a huge team of prosecutors who were heralded as the most talented and aggressive, an unlimited amount of funds, subpoena power. And at the end of the process, a grand total of 0 Americans, was charged with and convicted of the original crime that was alleged, which was criminally conspiring with the Kremlin to interfere in the 2016 election. Now,
notice the specificity of his language right here. None of them were convicted of the original crime of criminally conspiring with Russia in order to affect the... Yeah, so the hyper specificity here is what he's lying on. There were people arrested, and many people indicted. Hold on, the Mueller investigation total indictments. What was it? Wasn't it in like the 30s? Yeah, A total of 34 individuals were indicted by Mueller's investigators. 8 have pleaded guilty to or been convicted of felonies, including 5 Trump associates and campaign officials. Yeah, it happened. Let me see the arrests. Yeah, Roger Stone, of course, had his arrest. Where's the yeah, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, guilty, convicted of felonies. Is there just like a list? Here, everyone charged in the Russia. Yeah, here we go. You remember these names, don't you? George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI. Paul Manafort indicted on 25 counts, mainly related to past work for Ukrainian politicians and his finances. 2 trials scheduled. Scheduled a plea deal, sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. Rick Gates, plea deal with Mueller's team, pleaded guilty to 1 false statements charge. Michael Flynn, false statements to the FBI. California man pleaded guilty to identity theft charge. Longtime business associate with Manafort and Gates charged. Alongside Manafort attempting to obstruct justice by tampering with witnesses in Manafort's pending case last year. Michael Cohen, we remember this one, tax and bank charges, former lawyer. Roger Stone, indicted on 7 counts, accused of lying to the House Intel Committee about his efforts to get in touch with WikiLeaks during the campaign and tampering with a witness who could have debunked his story, convicted on all counts after November 2019 trial. Like, yeah, seems to me like it was a pretty successful investigation, in my opinion, you know? Yeah, and then there was the Senate Council afterwards. That's right. And then after the Mueller investigation, there was the bipartisan Senate investigation, which released the 5th volume back, what was it, mid-2021, early 2021, which is unfathomably large. But it finds, here we go. What did the Senate Intel Committee find? The 5th and final volume, here we go. Closing the door to silence the baby. Hold on. The volume 5 is nearly 1,000 pages and covers quite a bit of ground. The report describes hundreds of actions by Trump, his campaign, his associates in the run-up that involve some degree of participation by Trump or his associates in Russian activity. It goes on for quite a while. They would tell you this is deep state propaganda. I mean, it was just a bipartisan Senate committee. The point that I'm getting at here is that the Mueller investigation found plenty worth looking into. And the Senate investigation found that, yeah, Russia was trying to tamper with our elections.
One single American was even charged with that because, according to the Mueller investigation, they couldn't find evidence establishing that crime was committed, and yet it didn't remotely deter, even to this day, people from alleging that happened. Exactly the same thing, Saagar, is happening here. Mm-hmm. I don't know why media outlets feel entitled to refer to the January 6th riot as an insurrection, as though there's no debate about it, when we are now a full year into what the FBI itself heralds as the largest.
A violent uprising against an authority or government. Yeah, I'd say there's like no debate about it. It's pretty much crystal clear, I'd say.
This law enforcement operation in the history of the FBI. 700 people or more are now charged with the crime in association with January 6th. And not a single one, not one of those people has been charged with insurrection, inciting insurrection, attempting to overthrow the government, sedition, treason. They're all just common crimes of trespassing or violent assault for the ones who use violence, interrupting government procedures.
I don't think insurrection is a legal crime. Wait. The FBI can still arrest you for doing crimes, you know. In fact, the FBI does that for federal crimes. The FBI arresting people for doing a crime at a federal building is not in any way special. This is what, like, people talk about this guy like he's some kind of brain genius. They're like, and the FBI has done this unprecedented thing where they're arresting people who did crimes on a federal building. Okay? That's... They do that. They've been known to do that. It's been known to happen.
Processes. So if this were actually an insurrection or a seditious act or a coup, why is the Justice Department, under the control of the Biden administration, not William Barr or Donald Trump, not charging anybody with what those crimes are that are alleged to have taken place?
That's not how it works. They say the January 6th attack was a coup. Then why haven't any of the people there been charged for cooing? What are you talking about? That's not how it works. Just because something is a thing doesn't mean that the legal crime everyone involved in that thing are charged with. Like, hey, you claim these 6 men committed a bank robbery, yet not one of them has been charged with bank robbery. They've been charged with breaking and entering, brandishing a weapon, assault and battery. Not one of them has been charged with bank robbery. So how could they have done a bank robbery? That's literally the argument that he's putting forward right here. And, you know, the shock that the FBI would be the one charging people with federal crimes. Actually, wait, hold on. They're in D.C. Wouldn't you expect the FBI to be disproportionate with the number of crimes they get involved with there because D.C. isn't a state? Like they're like kind of a territory of the federal government, right? Wouldn't I feel like the feds would be involved in quite a few crimes that take place there? Yeah, this is ridiculous. It's not even a state. There aren't even like state police. There are DC police, of course, but still, you know, you'd think, yeah.
Charging them with very common crimes that happened in protests and riots instead, because that's what that event was.
You know, it's interesting because I see really now for the first time a significant number of liberals online who are upset about this, who are angry at Merrick Garland, who feel like, why do we just have these low-level crimes that are being charged and these, you know, low-level actors who aren't at the high level? Where are the big charges? Where's the big revelation of the plot that we've kind of been led to believe should be forthcoming by the leaders that we ultimately trust? So I kind of understand why they feel angry right now that they haven't gotten what they ultimately were.
Notice how they're saying opposite things right now, but they're still nodding along. Krystal is saying that liberals are mad that there haven't been more people charged, whereas Glenn is saying that there's essentially not anything really worth charging to begin with. But for some reason, Glenn is nodding along with Krystal. This is because Glenn is an idiot. Also, ideological incoherence is kind of a big part of the game here. Once you're at the Nosbel vortex, you know, the conflation of a bunch of different positions. Because what Krystal is saying right now is, you know, why aren't we going after the big ones who really orchestrated this? But who orchestrated it? Well, if you pressed him, Glenn would probably say the feds. But in reality, we know for a fact that Republican legislators were putting on tours, were having calls with January 6th, you know, like people beforehand. I think it was Gassar who said that they would protect them if anything happened. Like, this is essentially criminal conspiracy right there. But Glenn Greenwald can't acknowledge this because Glenn Greenwald is a Republican.
Promised by this narrative.
I totally agree. And again, it's the same thing that happened in Russiagate. Remember, for 3 years, nobody was allowed to speak ill of Robert Mueller. We weren't allowed to remind people that he was the one who went before Congress as the FBI director and assured the Congress that they had definitive evidence that Saddam Hussein had nuclear and biological weapons. We weren't supposed to remind anybody that he was the one who oversaw the rounding up of Muslims after 9/11 without due process.
You totally
because to do so was to impugn the integrity of the brave men and women in the FBI who keep us safe. There was a prohibition on treating him as anything other than a hero. And then suddenly, when he didn't deliver, when he closed his investigation without frog marching Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr. and Steve Bannon out of the White House and Jared Kushner, whoever their fantasies were, then suddenly everyone turned on him. And in fact, Adam Schiff in his book basically said that Robert Mueller was senile because they needed, it's like a, you know, it's kind of like an apocalyptic cult.
So this is completely made up. Mueller's investigation was considered successful to people who were paying attention and unsuccessful to people who thought that he would literally, like, take down the entire Trump administration. If you thought the goal of the Mueller investigation began and end, like the only acceptable threshold for outcomes was single-handedly ending the entire Trump administration, which, by the way, if that had happened, Glenn Greenwald would be crying about it to this day. He'd be saying the deep state took down Donald Trump because they couldn't handle the truth or whatever. But, you know, I'd say that getting a number of arrests, like 5 people from the Trump administration, which is like an insane number of people to arrest in a single probe, I'd say that's a pretty good outcome in terms of uncovering or the swamp, I guess you'd call it. That's pretty okay. In terms of like people turning on Mueller, people turn on other government officials all the fucking time. And you could always criticize Mueller for his previous stuff. But I never saw anyone criticizing Mueller back in 2017, 2018 for his like 9/11 era behavior. I saw them criticizing him for being an agent of the deep state taking down Donald Trump. I don't even remember Glenn Greenwald talking about him like that. They always say that, right? You know, people like Glenn Greenwald will attack people for being like, you know, deep state conspirators, and then later be like, I'm being attacked for saying that they were irresponsible in their foreign policy decisions back in 1998. You know, they always bring it back to the legitimate criticism that they weren't making, you know, instead of the real one they were.
If you keep promising everyone that doomsday is coming on a specific date and then it doesn't happen, you have to provide an explanation about why it didn't to keep the flock believing. The same thing has happened here.
Listen, this is insane right here. Like, yeah, the Mueller investigation was like a witch hunt, and they needed to sacrifice virgins. Like, this is just making shit up.
Promising, you know, that Merrick Garland was going to come in, not even 1/6, but that they were going to prosecute Trump and Trump officials based on the obstruction of justice that Mueller laid out, that for some reason this honorable prosecutor and all of his aggressive prosecutors themselves didn't prosecute, but Merrick Garland was going to do that. He hasn't done anything like that. And they also think that, you know, like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and like Lauren Boebert and all the members of Congress that they hate are also going to be rounded up very shortly and put in prison. And they're starting to see that's not going to happen either. And you're right, this disillusionment, they're now turning on Merrick Garland the way that they did finally turn on Robert Mueller, is normal and natural. But at some point, you would think these liberals would start to question whether the people they're listening to, the media outlets and the political leaders, are actually trustworthy.
See, exactly. Right now, he's defending them. The Republican legislators who were complicit in the January 6th attack, he's saying, like, yeah, maybe these liberals should question whether or not they actually should be arrested. This is the doublethink right here. Krystal will say, Krystal will mention that the state hasn't gone after those Republican legislators in a way that implies they should, and then Glenn will reference the event in a way which indicates he thinks that they absolutely shouldn't, explicitly. And Krystal will not challenge his point on this. So, Krystal has not explicitly said, no, I don't think any of the Republican legislators who are complicit in this should be prosecuted. She's just going to acknowledge what Glenn said and move on. This is the doublethink at play right here. Krystal comes off like the reasonable left-leaning one, and then Glenn Greenwald comes in with something a little crazier, and Krystal stays quiet about it. This is how it works. Who was the official? It wasn't Gassar, was it? Which was the one who said, like, we'll protect you, basically? Yeah, there were like there were multiple Republican legislators. We did a video on this before, who were essentially aware of what was going to happen and were basically, yeah, look at this. Look, right here. Gassar was involved. According to the report, Gassar, one of the most prominent defenders of the Jan 6 rioters, promised a blanket pardon to people to encourage them to organize protests against the election. This is explicitly being complicit right here. Right there. If people are like, yeah, we're going to march on the Capitol, and Gassar is like, if you get charged with anything, we'll protect you. Like, that's conspiracy right there. Simple as that. No ambiguity about it. But now Glenn is saying that the fact that these people haven't been charged is actually an indication that liberals should stop trusting the media. Like, Glenn's takeaway from this isn't, hey, we should charge these people. It's, the liberals were delusional for believing they ever should be charged.
The way they keep leading them down this path that leads to a dead end and not to this promised land of nirvana. And yet, so far, at least, it doesn't seem to be happening. They just keep blaming. I saw today, for example, Eli Mistel, the correspondent at The Nation, a beloved star of MSNBC, who was on Democracy Now!, ranting and raving against what he called the two white prosecutors, Merrick Garland and Robert Mueller, for failing to do their job by not putting Trump in prison. This is still where their rage is going.
And you know, Glenn, the lack of prosecution leads to some other interesting questions around the fact that we know for a fact that many of the people who are on video as ringleaders or people who pushed the actual riots on January 6th have either not been indicted or taken off the most wanted list and more. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, that seems to be another area of inquiry. It's like, well, yes, there is lack of prosecution, and that raises some interesting questions about what exactly was going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 10 years devoting a lot of reporting time, as did several other journalists associated with the left. It was a very popular form of reporting on the way in which the FBI would infiltrate what they regarded as threatening groups of young, typically Muslim men in the United
So now we're going to talk about FBI infiltration.
States and would use infiltrators and informants to lure them into plots that they themselves had never thought of and hadn't indicated any interest in pursuing, but the informants manipulated them into agreeing to join the plots, and then the FBI would swoop in at the last minute and praise itself and congratulate itself for disrupting a plot that they themselves had concocted. So
this is true, by the way. The idea that feds would put plants in groups of, like, minority groups or like this, that, or the other, and then like bust the event and go like, oh, look at us, we're saying like that. Yeah, this absolutely happened. Yeah.
We know for certain that the FBI is doing the same thing to far-right groups, which they say is the #1 threat to American national security, not Russia, not China, not Al-Qaeda or ISIS, but right-wing domestic extremists.
Yes. Unquestionably. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, whatever, pose... Well, Al-Qaeda barely even exists anymore, but pose, like, no threat to America. So pretty much anything... Drunk driving poses more of a threat to America than ISIS does. ISIS and the Taliban pose threats to other groups of people. They pose threats to, threat to Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghanistanian people, respectively. Americans are essentially entirely unaffected by these groups, assuming we're within the borders of America. If you're an American and you go to Afghanistan, the Taliban might be more of a problem.
Because in the Gretchen Whitmer case, the kidnapping case that was such a big deal was made of that before the election, we now know that at least half, if not more, of the people in that plot, including the leaders, were acting at the behest of the FBI. We also know for sure, Saagar, that the FBI had at least...
So this is a misrepresentation right here. This was when the group of people were trying to kidnap Governor... is it Whitner or Wechner? I always forget. I always forget there. Whitmer? Yeah, okay. Just because there are informants in a presumed crime or a planned terrorist event does not mean that it's being orchestrated by the feds. Those are two different things, okay? Just like the federal agents of the United States, they have ears absolutely everywhere. They have informants in probably every group that exists, okay? Every major corporation, without a doubt, has probes in it from intel agencies, okay? Every major government that America gives a shit about, every institution, everywhere, all the time, okay? That's their job. They're the intel group. They're the intel agencies. But yeah, political campaigns, administrations, everything, all the time, everywhere. That's what they do, okay? There are feds in this chat right now. I'm a fed. That's how life is, okay? With that being said, just because there are informants present does not mean that it was orchestrated by those groups. Now, I could be wrong on this. Is there any evidence at all, like any at all, that the kidnapping of the governor was orchestrated by the feds, as opposed to simply something that federal informants were keeping an eye on? Yeah, I don't think so. Also, again, like, here's another thing, by the way. If you really subscribe to this conspiracy bullshit and you think that all these things that right-wingers do is actually secretly being orchestrated by the feds, why does nothing ever come of that? Like, the whole point of the feds doing plants in, like, Muslim groups was so they could bust them and promote the kind of, security... a number of geopolitical interests. But like after the governor kidnapping thing, what did the state do? Like, what did the deep state do, It's like when Alex Jones talks about how the Sandy Hook shooting being faked so that the government could do gun control. They didn't do gun control. Like, what happened?
At least 2 informants on the ground embedded in the crowd, because the New York Times itself confirmed that. And, you have a congressional committee, presumably or purportedly attempting to get to the bottom of what happened, and they have zero interest in asking why the FBI didn't do that, right? You would expect them to be angry that the FBI didn't. We were talking before about 9/11 and the failure that was by the NSA with their billions of dollars every year not to detect this.
Why would the January 6th probe be looking into the behavior of the FBI? What? Why would they do that? What?
Or the FBI. Why didn't the FBI have their tentacles in these groups? Or if they did, what is it that they knew? And are there people who were ringleaders who aren't being prosecuted for that reason? Is a question that the people who have the capacity to answer that, namely the Justice Department and the 1/6 Congressional Committee, are steadfastly refusing to get near, which only makes those.
Hey, 1/6 Committee, ask the FBI if they had informants at the... First of all, of course there were informants at 1/6. Obviously, there were informants everywhere. You think that you were at the Capitol building? You don't think so? Of course there were. Don't be stupid. Like, what? Hey, group of people investigating 1/6, why don't you take all of your attention away from the obvious orchestrators of this event, the conservatives, and move it towards the FBI, a group that I like less, This is the thing, like, the FBI didn't need to do shit here. Everyone on the right supported 1/6. Trump pushed for it. Republican legislators were complicit in conspiratorially defending the people before they actually attacked the Capitol building, and everyone on the right was celebrating it as it happened. Why would the feds need to do anything? Like, what would the feds be? What did they, like, make Trump and every Republican everywhere support it? Like, it's not like it was just some random, sporadic, unpopular conservative group that acted against the wishes of the broader party. It wasn't like a school shooting. The right supported it. So, like, what would they even need to do?
Suspicions more valid.
What do you make of the fact, Glenn, that, the last time that cable news networks got good ratings was basically 1/6. And so they've devoted a lot of time and coverage to exploring that day, exploring their personal...
Dude, that's crazy. 24-hour news cycles benefit from big news events? That's wild.
Feelings on that day. There's this congressional inquiry. So Washington has really wanted to focus a lot of time and attention on 1/6.
Wait, Washington doesn't control the news channels. This is like, Krystal, the news channels, being businesses, will focus on events that people find interesting, so they make more money. That's how ratings and advertisement money works. Washington isn't doing anything here outside of having a committee investigating January 6th.
Even as the public isn't really following them there. I mean, the top concerns for people are things like inflation, the economy, healthcare. I mean, the same sorts of things.
Delusional. Inflation? Are you fucking kidding me? Have you talked to your average voter?
That people generally are concerned about.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I know I keep pausing, but, like, Ben Garrison's comics on 1/6, the day of and 1 year after, are so perfectly indicative of Glenn Greenwald's attitude here. 1 year ago, the January 6th rioters were these, heroic, political citizens, demanding the deep state listen to them. And now 1 year later, actually, it was the FBI pushing these poor, unaware MAGA supporters over into the death trap of committing an obvious crime. Like, it's insane, the doublethink right here. It's absolutely insane, the doublethink. Like, oh yeah, dude, we're winning, let's go. And then it's like, it was actually a trap that we fell for, but we were forced to do it. We have no agency. We don't take responsibility for anything we do. Yes, Vosh, the average voter cares very much about rising food prices. If you did a list of things people care about, like top to bottom, I would be very surprised if inflation breaks the top 5. Also, just because people care about it doesn't mean they want to see news coverage of it. Can you really imagine the average American sitting down and watching 4 hours of fucking CBS talking about inflation as opposed to the January 6th commission. Are you kidding me? There's a big difference between what people care about and what makes good news, and also what's important. Those are all three different things, you know?
So what do you read into the fact that the public has by and large not gone where the media has wanted to lead them?
So
I love the way they lead every narrative, like the little bitch conspiracists they are. The public hasn't gone where the media has tried to lead them. The implication here being that the January 6th Commission, in tandem with the entire media apparatus, is trying to control the public, and lower TV ratings are a product of them not buying the bait. Whereas, of course, and no data is being presented to support any of this, by the way. No, like, data on how much time is being spent covering the January 6th stuff. No data on, like, relative ratings for this versus coverage of other issues. Like, nothing whatsoever. Just vibes. Just conspiracy bait.
I mean, the dirty little secret of the liberal wing of the corporate media is that nobody benefited more from Donald Trump and his presidency and his campaign and then the aftermath more than that sector.
Damn, the dirty little secret that everyone has said all the time. Hey, did you know Trump makes good TV? Yeah, oh, you did? Because everyone's always said that all the time, nonstop, constantly. You can't go a day without hearing it because everyone knows it. Dirty little secret. Jesus Christ. This is conspiracy brain, you know? They have to make every obvious bit of info feel like a little secret, you know? Like a teeny tiny little secret that you're getting clued in on to make you special.
The liberal wing of the corporate media. It saved enormous amounts of jobs. It generated enormous ratings. January 6th was the single most watched day in CNN's history. So, of course, they have an interest in trying to rejuvenate and remind everyone and get everybody all excited again.
That's
but one of the
crazy.
things I was always trying to say during Russiagate was that I don't believe that Americans wake up in the morning thinking at all, let alone first and foremost, about what the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin are doing, even though that was like 70% of what cable news and liberal outlets were talking about.
Any data on that?
And I think the same is true for January 6th. Why would they? It was like 900 Trump supporters, you know, 2 of whom had never left their couch, so they dropped out of a heart attack, a 3rd of whom died of a speed overdose, and the 4th was shot in the neck by a member of the Capitol Hill Police. They killed nobody. There were no weapons brandished inside the Capitol. There have been no repeats since then. The problem, Krystal, is that there's these really warped incentives where if you're the New York Times or if you're CNN.
Well, we're downplaying this tremendously, which is one thing. But you'll notice, by the way, that nothing about there were weapons, there were bombs planted, but like, you know, and Krystal's laughing along. You'll notice, by the way, Glenn will never point out that 98% of right-wing media focuses their time on nonsensical bullshit. You know, like they're like, I don't think the American people care about Russiagate and Jan 6. At least those are real news stories, as opposed to like, yeah, fucking Benghazi, or the whatever the fuck I'm looking at whenever I look at a Tucker Carlson segment, critical race theory, you know, Christmas being stolen, the war on Mr. Potato Head's Dr. Seuss or what, like, yeah, Jesus Christ, you know, this is what I mean about how, this is what I've said before about how selective honesty is as bad as dishonesty. If you're willing to point out that the liberal media focuses on stuff people don't always care about, but you completely ignore the fact that right-wing media is not only equally complicit in this behavior, but far worse on it, then it's tantamount to dishonesty. You're essentially lying. Yeah, the tan suit. You Zoomers in chat can't fathom this era of politics, okay? But the tan suit debacle, you can't even imagine. You can't even begin to fathom.
Earlier today, you were criticizing what President Obama said yesterday. Admittedly, many Democrats feel he was inartful in his phrasing yesterday about not having a strategy ready for Syria. You also, though, criticized the president's wardrobe, his choice of suit, of a light-colored suit. Do you think that was fair to do that?
Yeah, because it was in the context of the president coming out. The world and the country have been waiting for a week for what he's going to say about Syria, what he's going to say about ISIS. And he comes out, yes, with this new suit on. But what bothered me was he began by not even talking about Syria. He said he wanted to talk about the issue that most Americans are concerned about, and that's the fact that the economic numbers for the second quarter had been adjusted. And to me, that was an insult to the memory of Jim Foley, who was killed.
Why did you take issue with the suit?
Because you know the image makers in the White House. Here's a president coming out at such a serious moment where he should be addressing the country on such a serious matter, and he looked like he was on his way to a party at the Hamptons, which would have been fine if he addressed the issue at hand. But instead, he started talking about the economy.
I remember this era. This was the good era of politics. Now you just see clips of people making fun of the event, but I remember Fox News actually was like offended. I remember the days. Oh yeah, when they said he was an elitist because he liked Dijon mustard.
You only need to rile up a certain percentage of the population that's very small. And
playing devil's advocate here, but aren't they basically describing manufacturing consent? There are a couple of issues with that. First of all, they're describing the concept incorrectly by misattributing like a sort of shared interest here. News corporations don't give a fuck about the deep state. They just want to make money. That's it. They just want to make money. They take orders from time to time on some specific stuff. The ramp up to the Iraq War was like a pretty clear indication of them like bowing to the State Department line. But there's no indication of that happening here with the Jan 6 shit. And there's no data being presented here. Like, how much are they even talking about the January 6 stuff? Like, if I like right now they're talking about it because it's the anniversary. I mean, Breaking Points is talking about it. But if I go to like CNN, because that's probably most representative. If I go to CNN and like take a look at what they're looking at, I don't think it's like they talk about it as though it's nothing but Russiagate and January 6th, and that this is some effort to steer the public. It's just an effort to get ratings, man. That's it. The deep state does not give a fuck about getting people angrier about January 6th, okay? Because whatever entrenched interests there are in America, they're the ones who did January 6th. Do you think the business class in America would give a fuck if we had a fascist coup? Do you think they would give a single shit? Do you think the entrenched monetary interests in America give a fuck about liberal democracy? That all the multi-billionaires and all the people who run the hedge funds and all the people who can meet with the president on a day's notice, that they're like deeply concerned with the perpetuation of our democracy? No, they're fucking not. We've seen this happen in other countries. We saw this happen in Venezuela. We saw this happen in Bolivia. We saw this happen in Nazi Germany. We saw this happen in Italy. Whenever a fascist coup is happening or on the rise or, you know, shoring up its edges, you know what they do? The fascists are like, hey, we won't regulate your industries and we're going to make things better for you. Let's go. And the business interests tend to support the new regime. They don't care about democracy. The truth is, if you're ultra wealthy, you don't really need a democracy to be free.
Can be completely homogenized. They're all liberals. They're all like-minded. But all you need is like 2 or 3 million of them to just get very invested in these fears again in order for them to become profitable again. But the news itself is completely detached from the concerns of the overwhelming majority of Americans who obviously are concerned with a million other things, from school closures to the pandemic to inflation to their labor conditions.
Wait, then couldn't you just say that the news media is fear-mongering about COVID in order to get people to be more complicit to lockdowns? This is the thing. This conspiratorial narrative can apply to anything. If they talk more about COVID, like, he downplayed COVID at the beginning of this video, you know? He would just say that if they talked more about COVID. Any real issue that he doesn't like them focusing on, he'll just say they're trying to, you know, trick the liberal population into, you know, into caring about it. The only thing that he wants people talking about is, you know, how bad lockdowns are and, you know, that the FBI is bad because they investigate conservatives. That's it. Like, it's nothing else.
Infinitely greater than the trauma of Hunter Walker and like other journalists who go on to Brian Stelter's show to do their therapy instead of doing it where they should, which is where with a psychologist. So there's this enormous cleavage between what the media is trying to talk about and what the public is interested in, which is why nobody watches their program.
Yeah, I couldn't think of a better way in order to, you know, spend January 6th, Glenn. It's a solemn day. This is the
Notice, by the way, how the title of this video is how the deep state weaponized January 6th, and they haven't actually talked about that. Isn't that interesting? Glenn Greenwald just came on to talk about how the liberal media is nobody watches it, and they're trying to trick people by playing news stories about news that's happening. Guys, do you know why the liberal media's ratings have fallen more than right-wing media? It's because the average conservative is older. If you adjust for age, conservatives are like 15 years older than liberals in America. Older people are more likely to watch TV. That's literally it. It's really that simple, okay? That is the reason why. There are more Democrats than Republicans, and every like available instance of polling indicates there are more left-leaning people than right-leaning people in this country. It's just, it's like we're talking about TV ratings right now.
Real reason that it matters to so many of the people in power, and that it's not even to whitewash, what was objectively a terrible event. But we got to talk about it in the way that it deserves. So thank you, man. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Glenn. Great to see you.
Great to be with you guys on this very difficult day. My solidarity to both of you.
Solidarity, man. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to know why we do this show, I actually do think today is a pretty good example. Being able to expose so much of the way that people in power weaponize objectively terrible things in order to try crack down on your life, be it code.
Wait, no, they never explained. How have they cracked down? What has been exposed? They promised they would tell me, and they still haven't told me, and now they're acting like they told me. They didn't say anything. What crackdown has happened? What policy changes have been made?
COVID, be it January 6th, and ignore their own role in creating the situation where people hate each other, where our lives are miserable.
What?
So, I mean, I'm very, very proud of the show that we put together today. I think it's a perfect representation of us. We appreciate your support, as always, but I'm just thinking about, I don't know what I would do without the show. Like, I think I would be sitting at home just...
Okay, I think they're just...
The Republicans, if you're Fox News, or the conservative outlets, it's the liberals and the left. That doesn't lead us ultimately anywhere productive and useful. So did our best to put together a show that was a little bit forward-looking, that tried to delve into some...
Not left, not right, but forward. Oh, I love my favorite type of content. It's just really stupid. What has happened? Listen, if people... If the government tried to use... First of all, let's be clear. If the government tried to use January 6th as an excuse to reduce our right to privacy even further than it already has been, Republicans would vote in favor of it. Republicans always vote in favor of expansions of the security state. Always. They both do. Both parties do. Okay? So I don't know why we'd be focusing on the Democrats or the liberal media if that was the case. And second of all, I would oppose it. But it hasn't happened. They're showing how the deep state has exploited Jan 6. How? The only exploitation they referred to, literally the only thing they referred to was news shows covered the event more than they wanted, except they never gave any data on that. So we're just supposed to like assume that it was a disproportionate amount. I mean, it was only, an attack on the Capitol building, the first time that's happened in a really long time. Just a little thing. They even went back to the Russia investigation. They always do. For these types, the Russia investigation is the same as the Syria shit for the gray zone types. It's exactly the same. In both cases, you have a situation where the thing everyone was saying happened did happen. Assad used chemical weapons, and Russiagate showed unequivocally that, yes, Russia interfered in our election. Like, no arguing about it. Bipartisan Senate committee, arrests, investigations, everything, the whole 9 yards, okay? But they deny this obvious and factual truth, and therefore they can delegitimize any institution that recognizes the truth and concoct and assemble an alternate reality using only sources and people who don't believe these objectively true things, which, of course, leads you inexorably to their positions